welcome in everyone. Hope everyone on YouTube is doing well. This video was originally a Twitch stream, so if you haven't already, go check out our Twitch stream at twitch.tv/SpacetimeDB. So today we are proud to announce that we have 0.9.0 beta. This is our first major release in quite a while, and we are happy to present it to you now. So we'll just start by going over the highlights here. So we have v0.9 with some rocket ships. So we have a big one for you today. Today we are releasing 0.9 of SpacetimeDB. It's been a while since our last official release, and we have got a huge number of changes and performance improvements. Most notably, performance has improved by 10x to 100x or more for certain parts of the database. Subscription evaluation in particular has gotten almost 100 times faster. This makes an enormous difference for people shipping production games. Version 0.9 is the same version that we ran the closed alpha for the MMORPG Bitcraft, which had 700 players playing concurrently in a single database. We are battle testing SpacetimeDB with our production game. We're so excited to see people with this new version. Awesome. And Tyler has gracefully included this footnote here. So for people's convenience, we provide a Spacetime upgrade subcommand. So if you have a previous version of Spacetime, you should be able to just run Spacetime upgrade to get the new version. Although if you're on Brew, or if you're on Mac OS, we recommend, if you've installed through Brew, just either rerun this command or do brew update and then brew upgrade, I believe. So that should get you the new version. Awesome. So Tyler, I guess, do you have any overall notes on the release that you'd like to highlight off the bat?
Sure. So, well, first of all, I guess the last release was 0.8.3, was a patch release, went out February 15th. So this is the first major release in at least 2.5 months, but I know we had probably a few weeks before that. So it's been almost 3 months. And the reason for that was that we were completely heads down, just trying to make sure that what we were delivering to the Bitcraft team was at the level that it needed to be, as we would for any customer. And we were fortunately able to get there for them and fix a lot of the bugs, a lot of the performance improvements. As I mentioned here, 10 to 100 times, and that's not an exaggeration. We really made those kinds of improvements, which is maybe more of a highlight of how much you can actually make things go faster if you take the time to measure and understand where things are going wrong. Because it turns out that what you think could be taking a long time may not actually be. And it gets very, very nuanced. And so you want to get down into the weeds. And if you do that and you actually measure, you can get some really, really cool performance gains. Also, I don't think by any means that this is the ceiling for what we could do. I could see another 10x. I wouldn't get beyond 10x. I think that's probably the upper limit for what a single database could do without getting distributed systems in any way, but gives you an idea of just how big these types of things can get. And I mean, we had, as I mentioned here, 700 players playing. So just for those who may not be familiar with SpacetimeDB, everything from the movement to the chat messages to the trees to the terrain, everything in Bitcraft is done in SpacetimeDB on the back end. So this is truly 700 people walking around, moving around, chopping trees, moving inventory, everything simultaneously on one server, which is quite a bit more than your average game server, and I think not even remotely the end.
Awesome. So maybe we'll go over just like the highlight section here, and we'll kind of talk about these points specifically. If you want to see the full release notes, actually, I'll post this in Twitch chat for anybody who wants to take a look at the release notes. And actually, these are so long, in fact, that this is our first release, I think, where there was like a read more button at the bottom. So if you go to the releases page, you won't see the full release notes unless you go all the way to the bottom of the release and you hit read more. Then you'll see the entire dump of everything that we've added to this release. It's quite a lot. So awesome. So we have highlights, vastly improved metrics gathering performance overhead.
When you get really sweaty about it, at some point the metrics that you're using to see things has an impact on performance. And so we were seeing situations where we had these metrics measurements, and they only took some number of nanoseconds, but they were running at such a fine grain control, so maybe like 500 nanoseconds, which is actually kind of a long time. But 500 nanoseconds multiplied by every row that you insert, it actually becomes a meaningful percentage of your total work. And so I think this was like a 2x performance improvement right there. So what we're doing is we're batching up the metrics measurements, instead just using counters, and then at the end doing it per transaction. So it's the same metrics, just gathered faster.
Excellent. So then the next point here, and this was a huge change. Stabilize the new transaction log formats for a 2 to 3 times reduction in transaction log size and much faster replay times.
Yeah, so this one, the message log format has been the same since I personally created it way back in the day, and I created it before we had done performance measuring. So one thing that we had a lot inside of there was content addressing, and what that means is essentially you do a cryptographic hash of your data, and then you use that hash as a proxy for a reference to your data, which is great. But it turns out when you get really sweaty about performance, the time it takes to hash rows is too large, at least with cryptographic hashes. And so what we did is we re-architected the transaction log to not do that. And as a result, we get both a smaller transaction log size and furthermore, a much more compressible transaction log because of the fact that cryptographic hashes have a lot of entropy. That's kind of what they're meant to do. And if you don't have that for everything, then you end up allowing compression on the transaction log to a much greater degree. So, and then there was a bad idea that I had, which is that I'm going to store the blob references separate from the message log or the transaction log. That turns out to be not a great idea, and so we fixed that as well. And that helps with the replay times.
Do you want to maybe explain what blobs are and why we needed them in the past?
Blobs are large objects that we stored in a separate storage, but it actually is complex. So you would, that would be like, if you have a file or something. Actually, in my old log, it was anything bigger than 32 bytes, which is way too small of a cutoff, like by a factor of 100. So we've increased that. We've now stored the blobs actually in the log, which is a much better way for once we do replication, essentially.
Excellent. So one other point to note about this release is that if you have a local database from 0.8 or previous, because of this change, your data on disk is actually incompatible with SpacetimeDB now. So you'll have to probably clear your data. You can export it by basically doing spacetime start with a 0.8.2 version and dumping all the tables, and then starting 0.9.0, clearing your data, and then actually basically writing reducers to upload all your data. It's a complicated process for now. Obviously, we're going to make that process better in the future, but that's one unfortunate change in this release. But this was very much needed, so we promise.
Yeah, we might want to add a warning actually in this release with respect to that people should do that. Otherwise, they'll have to downgrade. This is one of the benefits also of the ABI stability and API stability that we want to achieve in 1.0 is that we will not do this again ever, at least without providing a migration path where people can run their old database and convert it to the new version. So really looking forward to that. In fact, we almost certainly will not need to do that because we can always support the old message log. In either case, this is exactly why we want to get to 1.0 so that people can really build production applications on it. In our case, we manually went through and migrated the BigCraft data from the old log to the new log.
Yeah, if you've run a module on testnet before this release, we'd recommend running it on the new version of testnet because it's going to be so much faster. Okay, excellent. So this one's, I don't know if you want to talk about this one or not, but it says reduced unnecessary copying and cloning and core database paths.
Sure. I'd be happy to talk about this one. This might be interesting for people who are curious about performance. A lot of our problem just came from, hey, it's easier to clone or copy data here than to do something more intelligent. So it turns out if you do that in a hot path, it's really bad. That was a lot of what we did, is sort of thinking more about storing the data using references or using atomic reference counts and stuff like that to avoid actually cloning the actual data. And then I would also say, as a corollary, strings are slow. If you're doing strings, it's too slow, like sort of by default. So you really want to avoid doing strings. Why are strings slow? Because there's usually an indirection to the heap. They're long. Comparing them requires you writing code, and so on.
Okay, excellent. So the next point we have here, improved threading model for optimal performance. So is this referring to the Rayon change, or?
Yes, exactly. So basically, previously, for this release, we were loosey-goosey with our threads. We were just, thread here, thread there, whatever it is. When you get really down into the weeds, you may want to make sure that you're allocating the right amount of threads for the right amount of work. And so we've separated, and the right type of work, our asynchronous threads from our synchronous threads, so that we can get our work properly scheduled. And we actually had done that before, but we didn't have the right number, so there was a lot of context switching. And it turns out that you can optimize that and improve that significantly, which we did.
Awesome. So then we have fixed a critical issue for misbehaving clients or clients with very poor latency.
Yeah, so we had a situation where with our testing with Bitcraft, you would see that certain players, if they have problems, because of the way we wrote our code, the server would wait for them to the detriment of other players or running other transactions. So this was a tricky problem with locks and holding locks for too long, and then also some other queue-related stuff. And what we ended up doing is essentially just fixing that entirely. So first of all, we're not locking on that stuff. Sending to a person does not prevent the database from proceeding in any way. But more than that, if a client is misbehaving to a certain degree, we will eventually just kick them out. So we'll just say, goodbye, you're not responding to messages quickly enough. So we gotta get rid of you. And that's what that's about. That's something that, like, hey, you really only find out when you go into production and you're like actually seeing what real players interacting with the server looks like.
Yeah, and to include in this point as well, the actual network, I guess ABI, the network ABI, I guess it's kind of the API, but the ABI of network messages has changed due to this as well. Well, I guess as part of this change, we've introduced Brotli compression because we had noticed that there was particularly bad performance when sending large subscription messages to clients. And it turns out that these messages are highly compressible. I think our compression ratio is like 5:1 on these messages. So it basically goes from being 5 megabytes to being less than 1 megabyte. And that actually has helped with this latency issue quite a bit as well. And also some kind of tangential Linux things around how TCP works. Because it turns out that if your send buffer in Linux, like for the TCP connection, actually fills up, that will cause any subsequent sends on that connection to actually cause the program to kind of hang in that position until the buffer is able to release some more room by basically having the clients acknowledge that it's received the data. So the wire format of that has changed. So that's to be known.
And I think we'll do further improvements to this with the ABI stability to make sure that we've got the right headers and so forth, that we want to make sure that if we're changing that kind of compression stuff, that it's opt-in and you're not going to break your old clients and so forth.
So now we have multi-column index selection for the query macro. This is a huge one. This one's awesome to see.
Yeah, so this was one that we really needed for Bitcraft. And essentially the reason why is because we have certain parts of the code base that don't look things up by ID, but rather by location. So XZ and we needed to be able to filter very, very efficiently using an index on X and Z. So this is where you want to say, give me players based on their XZ position, and you want to just get that one player out of the database. This allows you to do that, whereas previously you couldn't really do that in an efficient way from the module. And we actually have some future improvements here where you won't even need to use the query macro for this. You'll just have a generated Rust function to do this as well.
Awesome. I don't know if we have an example of the usage for this. We'll probably throw something on the website if we haven't already in the documentation for this, because this actually is a huge performance improvement. If you have basically a table where you want to do indexes on multiple columns, or like a single index across multiple columns, in order to actually use that index, right now, as Tyler said, you have to use this macro. Okay, awesome. And then the last point in here is huge number of critical performance and bug fixes. Is there anything in particular that you want to highlight, Tyler?
I mean, there's a huge number of things. I just went through this list quickly and picked out some that are important, but it's just the little things. It's a death by 1,000 cuts in this case. We've gotten past all of the really dumb things, and now it's just getting in there and fixing some stuff. There's a lot more that we can improve from here, as I mentioned, and I'm excited to do it. I think we can get even faster for sure.
Yep.
So let me talk a little bit about our timeline, and the fact that I think we want to put out a public timeline, which could be really helpful for people kind of planning their applications around it. So right now, 0.9 was about, let's get SpacetimeDB fast enough to host an MMORPG server for them to run the Bigcraft Alpha. And we did that. 0.10, next release, is primarily about, hey, all of those things that once we ran the Bigcraft Alpha, we realized, like, gee, that's not hard to add. We should just do that. That's what this one is about. So it's about all the fixes that would have made our lives so much easier during that time. And I'll give you an example. One of them is hot swappable modules. What does that mean? Let's say you have 400 people connected to your game, just hypothetically, and you want to be able to change the logic of the module without disconnecting users. Right now, when you publish again, it'll disconnect everybody and reconnect everyone. In 0.10, you will be able to publish a module and the players will not disconnect or even know that the module changed. How cool is that? So that's coming in 0.10. That's super exciting. There's a lot of other really cool things like that that would have made our lives much easier. And then after that, we're going to be focused on really documentation, ABI, and API stability. So that's getting to the place where we can launch this into 1.0. That'll be our top priority after that. Once it's 1.0, we're basically saying, hey, we're going to support these data formats for a long time. You can deploy your games if you have one on your own server and run that, and know you're not going to wake up one day and be like, okay, cool, now my data is has changed versions. And if I want to continue upgrading SpacetimeDB, I have to change things.
So we've already publicly announced that the next Bigcraft Alpha, so Alpha 2, is going to be starting on, I believe, June 17th. Do you have, I guess, would you have like a timeline for 0? Because that's going to run on 0.10 internally. Do we know what we're planning to do for the release for 0.10 for SpacetimeDB?
We are going to be releasing 0.10 prior to that next playtest.
So I guess any final notes on this release? We're really happy about this release. So if you haven't already, please download it and give it a try. If you run into any issues, please bump us in the Discord.
One note I'll just bring up about what Squid asked about is you need client updates also then. So actually, in the vast majority of cases that we found in practice, we wanted to change the module for, you don't need client updates. This is just a purely, oh, right, there's a bug in the module. Let's say somebody can duplicate items or something because the logic is just wrong, right? So it didn't check some kind of a thing, some precondition, and now you can do that. Well, that doesn't require any changes to the clients. No types have changed, nothing has changed, just the server logic. For those types of things, you should be able to hot swap that out there, no client updates at all.
Right, assuming your types haven't changed. No client update should be required.
I think that's those are the major ones. I'm very excited for 0.10, and then I'm very, very excited to get those documentation in order. We've already done some improvements to the documentation. We've made some fixes. More are going to be coming. More are probably going to be coming very, very soon. We're going to be making changes to them as time goes on. We're looking to make the Unity tutorial up to date. We've got a new one. It's more gray boxy because I think that's easier for people to kind of imagine their game on top of it than a scenario where we've got all the assets in there and you're kind of like, okay, but what if I want to make a different game? I think a gray box helps with that. And so I think that'll be really cool to get out in front of people.
So yeah, thank you everybody for watching. This is the end of the YouTube video, but the Twitch stream shall continue for a bit. And if you haven't already, consider following us at twitch.tv/SpacetimeDB because we're either working on SpacetimeDB stuff or doing release notes or Q&As. So if you want more SpacetimeDB content, definitely consider giving us a follow on Twitch. So yeah, thank you YouTube, and we'll see you next time.